Have you ever been somewhere so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat? Most people think forests are peaceful. They're wrong. The deeper you go into the woods, the more you realize silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's waiting. My name is Ethan. What I'm about to tell you happened during the summer of 2022 when I accepted my first job as a camp counselor. I never believed in ghosts. I never believed in monsters. And I definitely never believed the creepy stories counselors told around the campfire to scare new campers. But after what happened that summer, I stopped laughing at those stories because every single night, someone walked around our cabin, counting slowly. 1, 2, 3, until they reached 10. Then they disappeared. At first, I thought it was a prank. By the end of that week, I wasn't so sure anymore. The camp was hidden deep inside the forest of northern Michigan. Once you drove through the entrance gate, the outside world simply disappeared. There was only one narrow gravel road leading in and out of the property. 12 wooden cabins, a dining hall, a small medical cabin, a lake surrounded by pine trees, and endless forest stretching for miles in every direction. There was almost no phone signal, no internet, only emergency radios in case something serious happened. Honestly, I loved it. After 4 stressful years in college, I wanted one peaceful summer before starting my teaching career. The first 3 days felt perfect. The campers laughed all day. We played basketball, went kayaking, built campfires every evening. Everything felt normal. Exactly the kind of summer I had imagined. I was responsible for Cabin 7, 10 boys, between 13 and 15 years old. Most of them were loud, always teasing each other, always trying to get away with something. Except one boy. His name was Noah. He hardly spoke. He never joined the jokes. And every morning, he looked more exhausted than the day before. On the 4th morning, after breakfast, he quietly waited until everyone else walked away. Then he came over to me. "Ethan, can I tell you something?" I smiled. Sure. He looked around to make sure nobody else was listening. Then he lowered his voice. "I don't think we're alone here at night." I assumed he meant another camper. "What happened?" He hesitated. "Someone walks around our cabin every night." I shrugged. "Probably one of the counselors checking on you guys." He shook his head immediately. "No, they don't count." That answer made me pause. "What do you mean?" He swallowed nervously. "Every night, I hear someone outside. They walk around the cabin, and they count." I frowned. "Count what?" He looked straight into my eyes. "They count slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. They stop at 10. I stayed quiet. There are 10 boys sleeping in our cabin. I counted. So did they. For a moment, I honestly didn't know what to say, but I still believed there had to be a simple explanation. Kids hear strange things in the woods. Branches scrape against windows. Owls make sounds that don't even seem real. Old wooden buildings creak all night. Your imagination fills in the rest. That's what I told myself. That evening, I casually mentioned Noah's story to another counselor named Marcus. He laughed. Every first session, somebody thinks Bigfoot is walking around camp. I laughed too. It sounded ridiculous. And honestly, I forgot about it until that night. Just after midnight, the camp became completely silent. Every cabin light was off. The campfire had burned out. Even the wind had settled. I was lying in bed, reading a book, when I heard a voice, very faint, so quiet. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. At first, I ignored it. Then I heard it again. 1. I slowly looked toward my bedroom window. Silence. A few seconds passed. 2. This time, I sat up. The voice wasn't inside the cabin. It was outside, somewhere in the darkness. 3. Every number came several seconds apart. Slow, calm, almost emotionless. I grabbed my flashlight, carefully walked to the front door, and listened. Nothing. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could and stepped outside. Cold air immediately hit my face. The forest was completely still. I slowly swept my flashlight across the trees. Nothing. Across the empty basketball court, nothing. Across the cabins, nothing. Then I looked down. The gravel surrounding cabin 7 looked disturbed. Not footprints, not exactly. Long dragging marks, as if someone had slowly walked circles around the cabin, while dragging one foot behind them. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I wanted to believe it was an animal, or maybe one of the campers messing around before bed. So I went back inside, locked the door, and told myself I was overthinking everything. I had no idea that when the sun came up, one of the boys, sleeping inside cabin 7, would be gone. I barely slept after that. Every little sound outside made me sit up in bed. When morning finally came, I felt relieved. I honestly thought I had let my imagination get the best of me. I got dressed and walked toward cabin 7. The campers were usually awake before I got there. Someone was always arguing. Someone was always laughing. Someone was always throwing a pillow at somebody else. But that morning, the cabin was silent, too silent. I pushed the door open. 9 boys were sitting on their beds. Nobody was talking. Nobody even looked at me. Something was wrong. I looked around the room. Then I noticed it. One bed was empty. "Noah?" I asked. No one answered. I looked at the other campers. "Where is he?" Finally, one of the boys spoke. "We thought he was with you." A cold feeling rushed through my body. I checked the bathroom, the common room, outside the cabin. Nothing. Within minutes, every counselor at camp was searching. The camp director blew the emergency whistle. Every activity stopped immediately. Groups spread across the woods, calling Noah's name. For almost an hour, there was nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no signs that anyone had left the property. It didn't make sense. The camp only had one entrance. Someone would have seen him. Then, one of the counselors shouted from the lakeside, "We found him!" Everyone ran. Noah was sitting alone on an old wooden bench near the lake. His clothes were soaking wet. His bare feet were covered in mud. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He was just staring at the water. I rushed over. "Noah!" He slowly looked at me. His eyes looked empty, almost like he hadn't slept in days. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Yeah." "What happened?" He stayed quiet for several seconds. Then he whispered. I followed the counting. Every hair on my arms stood up. "What?" "I thought if I found whoever was counting, they'd stop." "What do you mean you followed them?" "They were walking toward the woods. I could hear them counting. They wanted me to come." The other counselors looked at each other. One quietly shook his head. They assumed Noah had sleepwalked. That seemed like the only reasonable explanation. But something didn't feel right. His shoes were still inside the cabin. He had walked through the forest, barefoot, over rocks, sticks, and broken branches. Yet somehow, his feet weren't bleeding. Not even a scratch. The camp director decided not to tell the parents. He didn't want panic spreading through camp. Instead, he told everyone Noah had wandered off while sleepwalking. Most of the campers accepted that explanation. I didn't, because later that afternoon, while cleaning the cabin, I found something under Noah's bed, a small notebook. Inside, there were pages filled with numbers, over and over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every page. Nothing else. Just numbers until the very last page. On the final line, everything changed. Instead of stopping at 10, someone had written 11. I stared at it for several seconds. There were only 10 campers. So, who was number 11? That night, I decided I wasn't sleeping. I turned every light inside the cabin off, pulled a chair next to the front window, and waited. Hours passed. Nothing. The forest stayed completely still. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow footsteps circling the cabin. Not running, walking, like someone had all the time in the world. Then, the voice returned. 1. The footsteps continued. 2. 3. Each number sounded closer than the last. I held my breath. 4. 5. 6. The voice reached the side of the cabin where the boys were sleeping. 7. 8. 9. I gripped my flashlight tighter. Then, and 10. Silence. I waited. Nothing happened. Maybe it was over. Then, after nearly 20 seconds, I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. 11. Every muscle in my body froze. The voice had never counted past 10 before. I jumped up and rushed outside. My flashlight cut through the darkness. Nothing. No footsteps. No person. No animal. Just empty forest. Then, from somewhere deep between the trees, I heard a child laughing. Not loudly, just enough to let me know. Someone was still out there. Something else had triggered it. Marcus whispered, "Did you see that?" I nodded. A tall figure stood just beyond the edge of the light, too far away to see a face, too still to be an animal. It didn't move. It simply stood there, watching the cabin. Then, the voice began again. 1. The figure started walking, slowly. It wasn't circling randomly. It was walking from one cabin window to the next, as if it were counting the people inside. Marcus quietly reached for his radio. The figure suddenly stopped. 9. 10. Silence. Marcus whispered, "That's it." Then, I didn't tell anyone about the laughter. Honestly, I wasn't even sure anyone would have believed me. By sunrise, every counselor was exhausted. Most of them assumed stress and lack of sleep were causing everyone to imagine things. I wanted to believe that too, until Marcus came running toward me. "Ethan, you need to see this." He led me behind cabin 7 to the largest pine tree on the property. Fresh marks had been carved into the bark. Not old, not faded, fresh. The wood underneath was still pale. Someone had done it during the night. There were only 5 words. "Don't let him finish counting." Nobody admitted writing it. The campers were questioned one by one. Every single one denied knowing anything about it. The camp director ordered the message to be covered with a wooden board so the children wouldn't panic. But the damage had already been done. Rumors spread through camp before lunch. Some kids wanted to go home. Others claimed they had heard footsteps too. By sunset, the atmosphere had completely changed. Nobody wanted to leave the dining hall. Nobody wanted to walk anywhere alone. Even the older counselors stopped making jokes. That evening, I made a decision. If someone really was walking around cabin 7, I was going to catch them. Marcos volunteered to help. We hid behind the storage shed about 30 yards from the cabin. From there, we could clearly see the front door. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 o'clock. Still nothing. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the motion light beside cabin 7 switched on. Neither of us had moved. 2. Its footsteps matched each number perfectly. Crunch. 3. Crunch. 4. The figure slowly tilted its head toward us. My heart nearly stopped. There was no way it should have known we were hiding. We hadn't made a sound. Then, for the first time, the voice spoke normally, not counting, just one sentence. "There's one missing." Every hair on my body stood up. The figure suddenly sprinted toward the woods. Marcus shouted, "Go!" We chased after it, branches slapped against our faces. The flashlight beams bounced wildly between the trees. For almost a minute, we kept hearing footsteps ahead of us. Then, they stopped. We reached a small clearing. nobody was there, only an old stone fire pit, covered in moss. Marcus swept his flashlight across the ground. Look, there, pressed into the mud, were footprints. Except they didn't make any sense. They ended right in the middle of the clearing. No tracks leading away. No other footprints. Just a trail that simply stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished. Neither of us said a word. We quietly walked back to camp. The next morning, the camp director made a decision. The remaining session was canceled. Parents were told there had been a safety issue involving wildlife near the property. The real story never left the staff. At least, that's what we believed. A week later, I packed my things and drove home. I never planned on returning. A few months passed. Life slowly felt normal again. Until one afternoon, I received a small envelope in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Cabin 7. The picture had clearly been taken from inside the woods. Looking toward the cabin, on the back, someone had written only 4 words. "You forgot number 11. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then something hit me. Something I had never thought about before. There had been 10 campers, 1 counselor, me. Whoever was counting wasn't counting the children. They were counting everyone inside the cabin. And the last number was always reserved for me. I moved to another state shortly afterward. I never went back to that camp. As far as I know, it still operates every summer. Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up after hearing a sound outside my house. I'll lie perfectly still, holding my breath, hoping I imagined it. But every now and then, through the silence, I hear a voice, very faint, very slow, 1. And no matter how hard I try, I never stay awake long enough to hear what happens after 11.